Hello, my friends. Let's start with Trump. He made a series of statements about Russia and once again called Putin a paper tiger.
And I said to him, you don't look good. You're 4 years fighting a war that should have taken a week. Are you a paper tiger? And it's a shame, but I think eventually we'll get that one done.
Trump also mentioned that Medvedev threatened the US with nuclear weapons and called Medvedev stupid.
We were a little bit threatened by Russia recently, and I sent a submarine, nuclear submarine, the most lethal weapon ever made. Number one, you can't detect it. There's no way. We're 25 years ahead of Russia and China in submarines. Russia's actually second in submarines. China's third, but they're coming up. They're coming up. They're way lower in nuclear too, but in 5 years they'll be equal. They're coming up. And you don't have to be that good with nuclear. You could have 1/20th what you have now and still do the damage that would be, that'd be so horrendous. But I announced that, based on his mention of nuclear, and it was really a stupid person that works for him mentioned the word nuclear, I moved a submarine or two, I won't say about the two, over to the coast of Russia, just to be careful, because we can't let people throw around that word. I call it the N word. There are two N words, and you can't use either of them. Can't use either of them. And frankly, if it does get to use, we have more than anybody else.
Basically, Trump is trying to put Russia in its place. Friends, share your thoughts about this in the comments. Kellogg also said that in the long run, Russia will lose this war. The US President's special representative said Putin may not sit down at the negotiation table within the next 12 months, and the allies' main goal is to show the Russian dictator that he needs to do it. You have to hope, but you shouldn't plan based on hope. That's not the best strategy. But you need to make sure he understands. In the long run, he can't win. We're dealing with reality. Overall, we are waiting to see how things will develop next. And now let's move to the front. Today we'll start with the Lyman direction because big problems have appeared there. I can't say for sure whether this information is accurate, but late last night, Ukrainian military sources started reporting that Shandryholove is encircled. Most likely we'll see unfavorable changes to the front line there soon. Also, our fighters are saying for the second time that Zarichne is under Russian control. Lyman direction. Settlement Zarichne is effectively lost. The Russians entered the village and have secured positions, even raising one of their flags in the southern part of the farm buildings. Visually, their positions are now there. If you count by administrative borders, there is still a gray zone near the farms to the northwest and a small pocket to the north. But in practice, the larger part of the village is in Russian hands. From the Russian foothold to the southeastern outskirts of Lyman, it's about 5 kilometers, 600 meters. That's a very short distance the Russians can swallow under cover of mobility and fire. Their logical axis of advance is along Route 00525. The road is straight and points directly toward the approaches to the city. Of course, our defensive works stand in the way, but in reality, they are like old phone tariffs. These strong points are dug out in the open fields without cover, without deep lines. To a drone or precision fire, it's an open table. So the question, will they hold the borders? is rhetorical. Yes, they will delay them, but only briefly. If the Russians bring fire and cover the approaches at the right time, our fighters will be in a difficult situation. Remember, I showed a previous map where one of the flanks we expected to be weak turned out to be the Zarichne area. That's exactly what happened. They broke through, and this is the result. The consequence is simple. If we don't strengthen integrated defense, the Russians can advance and drive us into a deep corner. In short, the news from the front is pretty bad for now. In the Siversk direction, assaults on Yampil are still ongoing with pushes beyond Serebryanka, but no changes have been recorded over the past day. However, the situation in Yampil is also very difficult, and in fact, half of the settlement is already in the gray zone. At the same time, there have been no official statements yet, but Ukrainian fighters have started reporting that Russian forces are breaking through to the outskirts of Siversk. The Russians have secured positions on the northern outskirts of Siversk, the part locals call Little Siversk or Upper Siversk, near the Siversky Donets River. By visual confirmation, they already have a foothold, and it seems they are preparing to shift pressure into the next phase toward Dronivka. This is no random move. Taking a high or favorable riverbank position means gaining the ability to adjust fire, launch drones, and press the approaches under cover of fire and reconnaissance. If the Russians push further and capture Yampil and Dronivka, the situation for Siversk will become openly critical. Why? Because these settlements serve as flank nodes and communication hubs for our defense. It's no secret, it's logical. Without them, Siversk positions could come under flanking pressure, logistics would become more complicated, and the defense would gradually be squeezed. In the worst case scenario, the city could end up trapped in a pincer. In the Kramatorsk direction, the Russians are assaulting Minkivka. Shelling continues as well, but over the past day there have been no changes, and for now all attacks are being repelled. In the Konstantinivka direction, the Russians are pushing toward the eastern outskirts of the city, and the situation there is worsening. They are also assaulting Alexandru Shultine, Pleshiivka, advancing toward Ivanopilya and the village of Klebanbyk, as well as attacking in the area of Rusinyar and Poltavka. So far, there have been no changes over the past day, but the attacks continue. In the Dobropillia direction, the Russians are pushing toward the town of Bilitske, assaulting Nikanorovka, Shahove, and Volodymyrivka. At the same time, there are reports of successes by the Ukrainian forces in the area of Nikanorovka and Volodymyrivka. Still, the Ukrainian side reports that the situation there remains extremely difficult. It has been clarified that in the Nikanorovka area, the northern part of the village is still under Russian control and positional battles are ongoing. The Russians aren't rushing to storm head on, they are holding their positions, covering them with fire, and probing for weak spots in our defense. Along with this, there are assumptions that the Russians might attempt to move from the Dvorichna area toward Bilitske, though this hasn't yet been confirmed. However, we consider this a potential threat. If realized, it would give the Russians another strong point on our approaches. And therefore, it's important to hold reserves and strengthen surveillance in this sector to prevent them from securing a foothold and turning assumptions into reality. On our side, there is an advance northeast of Novoeconomichne in the ravine area. This movement carries risks. The territory is not yet secured and is still being clarified. We don't know yet whether we will be able to hold this bridgehead. It could become an advantage for us or a trap if the Russians force us to stay under fire without reinforcements. That's why it's crucial to quickly assess logistics and evacuation possibilities, whether we have a corridor for reinforcements or withdrawal, because this ticket could turn out to be one way if the flanks are not covered. Northeast of Sofiivka, the Russians were spotted in the forest belt area near the Poltavka River. Judging by the movement pattern, their goal is to take under fire control the supply routes leading to the Toretsk-Sofiivka-Shahove area. This would allow them to restrict our supply lines and cut off possible reinforcement approaches in order to weaken the garrison. If the Russians have enough strength and time, they will try to close off this sector and create problems for us during a potential withdrawal. As we can see, the Russians here are essentially trying to worsen the situation for the Ukrainian forces, making it harder for them to conduct counterattacks. Unfortunately, as before, it hasn't yet been possible to fully cut off the Dobropillia direction, even though rumors of 3 cauldrons for the Russians have been circulating online for 3 weeks. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians continue attacks in the area of the town of Rodynske, assault Krasnyi Lyman, Novoeconomichne, push into the areas of Myrolubivka, storm Lysivka, and the outskirts of Pokrovsk, as well as Molodetske, while also advancing near Kotline, Udachne, Kotline, and Zvirove. So far, there have been no major changes in the past 24 hours, but the situation here remains very difficult and Russian activity is not decreasing. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians are pushing through the fields toward the outskirts of the city. They are storming Dachne, Filia, Zelensky, and from several sides are attempting to advance toward Alexandrograd. No changes have been observed in the past 24 hours, but Russian activity here is at their peak. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are pushing near Sosnivka and storming Novogrigorivka. Otherwise, they continue to pull in reserves for new attacks. Since the capture of Verbove, there have been no further changes along the front line here. In the Huliaipole direction, the Russians are assaulting Poltavka and carrying out shelling. But over the past 24 hours, there have been no changes, and so far all attacks have been successfully repelled. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians are storming Stepnohirsk and pushing in the area of Stepove. Heavy shelling continues, but so far they haven't been able to advance further. At the same time, President Zelensky commented on the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
This is already the 7th day, and earlier, by the way, we never had such an emergency situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear station. The situation is critical. Due to Russian shelling, the plant has been cut off from the power grid and is running on diesel generators. This is extraordinary. Neither the generators nor the plant are designed for this, and they have never worked in such a mode for so long. We already have information that one of the generators has failed. It is precisely the Russians, with their shelling, who are preventing repair of the power lines to the station and restoration of basic safety. And this is a threat to absolutely everyone. No terrorist in the world has ever dared to do with a nuclear power plant what Russia is doing right now. And it is right that the world should not remain silent.
In the Kherson direction, the Russians are pushing on the islands, but have had no success. Have a shelling continues, but there have been no changes over the past 24 hours. Now moving to the Kharkiv region. In the Burova direction, the Russians are attempting to storm Boguslavka, but without success, and the situation remains stable. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russians are pushing near Redkivka, storming Kupiansk, and advancing in the area of Stepova Novoselivka. Ukrainian fighters report that the situation inside Kupiansk itself is difficult. In the Kupiansk sector, the situation is very tough. Our soldiers have taken a number of measures to prevent further breakthroughs. But the problem is that the Russians have already reached the center of Kupiansk on the right bank of the Oskil. Fierce battles are now ongoing for the apartment blocks in the city center. Everything happened very quickly, but the key fight was lost months ago when Russian bridgeheads appeared on the right bank of the Oskil. Russian groups are constantly trying to block our movement between the river banks. They can no longer cross through the pipe, but they have built up enough forces near and inside the city that further losses, while pulling reserves to the first and second lines, are not felt as sharply. Unfortunately, Kupiansk has become another example of how a tough situation can turn critical in just a month. In the Dvorichna direction, the Russians are pushing toward Dvorichanske, but activity here remains low and Russian forces haven't achieved any success. In the Velykyi Burluk direction, the Russians are not conducting new assaults and the front line has stabilized. In the Kharkiv direction, there is no activity, no new assaults are reported. In Vovchansk, fighting continues, but the Russians have achieved no success, and all previous attacks on Vovchansky Hutory have also failed. In the Sumy direction, the Russians are pushing toward the village of Konstantinivka, Sultan, Andriivka, Oleksiivka, Yunakivka, and advancing across the border. Activity is also reported near the village of Tyotkina. Here, the Russians are storming Bessalivka and again trying to enter Ukrainian territory, but so far the front line hasn't changed and all attacks are being successfully repelled. Today, Ukrainian fighters report that the Russians have suspiciously not used tanks on the front for a long time. On many sectors, the Russians haven't used tanks for quite a while, very rarely, excluding one or two units used for fire support during assaults, which is still uncommon. This type of armored vehicle has long stopped acting as armored taxis, and in my memory, the largest used in the past 4 months was 3 or 4 tanks toward Mirnograd this month. This fact suggests that all this armor produced at the Ural wagon plant is being stockpiled somewhere and prepared for something. The question is what, where, and when. Friends, what do you think about this? Could Russia be preparing for new offensive operations, or is there reduced tank activity due to the use of FPV drones? Share your thoughts in the comments. Meanwhile, Russia announced an allegedly routine autumn conscription campaign. In reality, we know that many of those drafted will end up on the front or defending the Russian border, which is effectively also a combat zone. So, as we can see, mobilization in Russia is ongoing. They just don't announce it as a new large wave of mobilization. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.